Some stories are meant to be told, but not all are meant to be heard. Tonight, you have a choice. Listen and risk carrying these nightmares with you, or leave while you still can. But if you're here, I dare you. Stay till the end, and let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from? The first story I'm going to read is called Never Look Out a Window at Night. You ever feel like someone's watching you, but when you turn around, there's nothing there? Yeah. But what if this time, something is there, and it's staring right back at you? I was always told not to look out a window at night, because you might not like what's looking back at you. They call this kind of thing an old wives' tale or something like that. But for me, it was just a bunch of silly crap, so I made a point to do the exact opposite. Like most people my age, I guess I felt like I was spitting in the face of some outdated, half-assed logic that some old person had come up with. I mean, who the hell goes around looking into people's windows? Am I right? And since I didn't believe in ghosts, monsters, demons, or whatever, I didn't give that notion a thought either. Sure, some of you'll say there are nutcasses that have been known to do this sort of thing. But I've always lived in a very nice neighborhood, so the likelihood of this happening was pretty slim, or so I thought. One night, I got out of bed to make a late-night deposit in the porcelain bank. Once the transaction was complete, I washed up and was all set to head back to my room. As I turned the light off and closed the bathroom door, I decided I was feeling kinda parched, so I went to the kitchen for a drink instead. Retrieving a glass from the cabinet, I opened the fridge and filled it with some tasty cucumber lime water I had made earlier. Because who wants to drink boring tap water? With my thirst now quenched, I sat the empty glass on the counter and was about to leave the kitchen when I glanced up at the window. Might as well take a peek, I said snidely as I walked over and looked out. As usual, nothing was there, and feeling more than a bit smug, I turned to walk back to my bedroom. But then I stopped. What's one more look-see gonna hurt? I asked arrogantly. Turning back, I returned to the window and looked out once more. The most horrible face I'd ever seen stared back at me. It was pale white, and as I gaped at the horrifying thing, a wide, inhuman smile spread across its visage. As if that wasn't terrifying enough, the thing's ghastly grin was filled to the brim with sharp, needle-like teeth. Fighting down the urge to piss my undies, I tore myself away from the window with a scream, ran back to my room, and then jumped in bed before pulling the blankets over me. Still hysterical, I tried to purge my mind of what I had just seen, but the abomination's ghoulish face was seared firmly into my brain. What the hell was that? I whispered to myself when a semblance of sanity finally returned to me. No sooner had I asked the question than I decided I did not want the answer. Instead, I tried to put it out of my mind and go back to sleep. But it took a long while for that to even happen. The next morning, my parents asked me if I'd screamed in the night for some reason, causing a fresh chill to run down my back. Not wanting them to think about the previous evening's fearful events, I shook my head and gave them some lame excuse about seeing my reflection in the window and how it had scared me. Content with this explanation, the two of them went back to their prior conversation, and there was no further discussion. Later on, after much inner debate, I began to feel convinced that I had most likely imagined the whole thing in the first place. It had been the middle of the night. I was extremely tired, and my eyes were probably playing tricks on me. With this fresh perspective in mind, I went about my day, never giving the situation another thought. That evening, my parents were out, and I found myself alone in the house working on college stuff. By the time I'd finished, It was getting late, and I was feeling famished. There's a container of hummus and some artisan crackers with my name on them in the kitchen, I told myself cheerfully. Putting my coursework away, off I went. And soon after, with my snack in hand, I started back to my room. As I passed the window, I stopped and glanced at it. I really didn't want to look, but I refused to bow to superstition. It was 2020 after all, and I had a partial college education, for crying out loud. My brain just wasn't built like that. Defiantly, I walked over to the window and looked out. Nothing. See there, I told myself haughtily. Superstition is wrong again. I walked a few steps down the hall, turned around, and then went back to the window before looking out it once again. The thing was there, smiling its evil smile, with horror descending upon me like a shroud. I dropped the hummus and crackers as I backed away from the window. My vocal cords wanted to scream, but my body was shuddering so badly that I couldn't even make a sound. The grinning terror on the other side of the glass raised a pale hand and waggled a long finger at me like a mother chastising her child. Maybe through some unknown inner strength, or just plain desperation, I pulled myself together long enough to flee to my room. Unfortunately, as I entered, I saw that the blinds on my 2 windows were open, and the hideous bastard stared sadistically at me from both of them. Without missing a beat, I ran back into the hall, feeling like it was my only chance. I entered the bathroom while slamming the door behind me. With fleeting sanity, I slumped down on the toilet with my head in my hands. Please just go away, I begged through my sobs. Hearing a tap from above me, I looked up at the small bathroom window. The grotesque thing was there too, smiling its ass off as it shook its head. It wasn't going to stop, apparently. Now reduced to a hopeless, quivering mess, I crawled into the shower and pulled the curtain closed. I existed there for the remainder of the night, sleep never coming to save me from my living nightmare. My parents found me there the next morning. Hysterically, I tried to tell them what had happened, but they could only look at me like I was possibly crazy. Then, as I went through the house covering every window, they decided that most assuredly I was crazy and made arrangements to admit me to this hospital. It's been a month since then, and despite a few rough days, initially, I've come to the conclusion that it's really not that bad here. The doctors and nurses are super friendly and very supportive. In fact, they even made sure I got a room without any windows, which has really helped my mental state. Things have been going so well that a few days ago I got my cell phone back, minus a few pertinent apps, regrettably. But you know how it is. Baby steps. With all this extra time on my hands, I've been thinking about the circumstances that led me to this point, and I've decided that maybe I was wrong. Old wives' tales and superstitions are no joke. People back then knew way more about things that we folks living in the here and now have chosen to ignorantly forget. So, if you're reading this, do not blow off the old ways. They exist for a reason. Now, that being said, there's another saying I've heard that's been on my mind lately, especially considering I have a mirror in my room. It's the one about the eyes being the windows to the soul. Story no. 2. Something has been walking my street at night. The next story. This one. It's different. It's called Something Has... Next story. This one. It's different. It's called Something Has Been Walking My Street at Night. We lock our doors, close the curtains, and pretend we're safe. But what if something out there is waiting? Not to break in, just to watch and listen until you slip up. It's 3:36 a.m. I am writing this, not as a cry for help, for I fear that it is too late for me, but as a warning for all of you. My name is John Waters. Recently had a change in place of work that required me to commute an hour and a half, one way. At first I didn't mind the drive, but then over the course of the next few months, it began to be something that I found myself dreading. This being the case, I kept my eyes open for any houses or apartments that I could afford in the area. That's when I stumbled upon a very nice house that happened to be in the local mill village. I was hesitant at first, but the price was unheard of. I booked an appointment with the realtor, and a few days later, I met with her at the house. I made sure to arrive a little early so I could explore the exterior of the property unsupervised. The house was beautiful, and so was the rest of the neighborhood. All of the houses were well kept, much unlike most other mill villages that typically fell apart once their mill had shut down. I walked around the house admiring the yard and all the plants along with it. The siding had a new coat of paint, and the yard appeared to have been recently landscaped. This house was clearly worth more than they were asking. I knew there had to be a catch, and that this was too good to be true. As I walked back around to the front of the house, I noticed one of the homeowners next door out watering in his yard. He was turned toward me with a blank look on his face. Realizing that this could be my neighbor soon, I decided to be friendly and waved at him with a smile. He hesitantly held up his hand to wave and gave me a half smile in return. There was an odd look in his eyes that gave me some discomfort. I noticed that he wasn't actually watering anything. The hose pointed straight up, and the steady steam of water poured onto his concrete driveway. I frowned at the sight of this, but my attention was taken away by the sound of tires on the pavement as the realtor pulled in. The realtor gave me the grand tour, talking up every amenity that would be included in the sale. I have to give her credit though. She was very good at what she did. I was in awe at every room. When the tour was over, we sat down on the perfectly staged couch in the living room and negotiated the price. I got right to it and asked her what the catch was for the price being so low in such a nice neighborhood. Her eyes slightly opened wider, but she immediately regained her composure. She stumbled over her words when she told me that most people give mill villages a negative connotation, and that makes them hard to sell. I slowly nodded and found myself considering the possibility of being stuck at that house with no resale value. I think she noticed my hesitation because she was overly quick to tell me that if I signed the papers today, she could knock off an additional $5,000. I should have questioned it. I should have thought it through. I should have weighed all my options. Yet it was such a good deal that I knew I couldn't pass up. I signed the papers without any further questions. After the closing process, I started early in the morning and got all of my things moved in and made the place look like home by the end of the day. I ate some pizza, had a few beers, and went out to the front porch to watch the sunset. I looked around and saw people working in their gardens and kids playing in the yards. It was all so nice. I noticed the door of the house across the street opened up to reveal an older lady with a pie in her hands. She waved at me with a huge smile as she crossed the street into my yard. I greeted her and told her my name. Hers was Anne. I received the pie from her as a welcome to the neighborhood, and we both sat down on my front porch and got to know each other. She was cheerful and frankly just a happy person. The smile that she wore seemed to never leave her face. Then the sun went down. Anne looked up at the now darkened sky and immediately shot up from her chair. I thought it odd and asked if everything was all right. All she told me was that she had to go clean her house at this time of night, and the way she moved so quickly caused me to believe otherwise. As I watched her descend the porch steps, I noticed that she wasn't the only one going inside. People stopped gardening and kids stopped playing. Everyone was heading inside their homes. Anne stopped halfway across the street to turn back to me. She told me that no matter what, never open my door after midnight. I started to respond, but before I could, she had already made her way across the street and into her house. She slammed her front door, and just like that, I was there, only one remaining outside. I briefly stood there dumbfounded before I headed inside and locked the doors. I had no idea what to make of all this, and to be completely honest, it was freaking me out. I had told myself that I was just imagining things, and that Anne was probably just a little off in the head. I knew I needed to get my mind off of it all, so I took some sleeping pills and watched some TV on the couch until I dozed off. At 1:38 a.m., I woke up to scratching on the front door. I quickly sat up on the couch as I heard it once more. My stomach sank to depths of which I had never felt before. My mind was racing back to all that had happened the day before. I crept over to the front window and did my best to discreetly peer through the blinds at the door. Nothing but the soft glow of the streetlights. Then I heard the scratching coming from the back door. I felt like I was going to throw up, but held it back in an attempt to not make a single noise. The scratching had ceased, but I still crouched on the living room floor for what seemed like hours to make sure the coast was clear. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. The next few weeks went by a lot more smoothly. After not hearing any more noises in the night, I chalked it up to just being some raccoons looking for a free meal. It was so convenient, only being 10 minutes away from work, and made my life a hell of a lot less stressful. I made new friends in the area and had more free time to go out and have fun. Everything was great until last night. I had been out late at a friend's house and didn't start heading home until about 1 a.m. I neglected to watch the time, and truthfully, it didn't bother me anymore. When I turned the corner to my street, it was as dead as usual. I noticed that, as I pulled into my driveway, the neighbors were poking their heads through their curtains, watching my every move. I looked down at my phone and pulled up messages to text my friend, letting him know I made it safely home. When I looked up, it was in my headlights, staring at me through the windshield. Words cannot describe the horror that I felt from what stood there in front of my car. It looked like a man, yet slightly more elongated. Its shoulders were hunched forward, leading down to fingers twice as long as anything human. Sharp, pointed claws grew out from its fingertips, and it repeatedly extended and retracted them as though it were some kind of tick. Its skin was a pale gray that looked as though rubber were stretched over its bones. Its eyes were solid black, where normally there would be white, with tiny, bright yellow pupils in the center. It took a step forward, stretching its long and bony legs, claws digging into the ground. I panicked and threw my car into drive and the floor to gas. I must have hit the creature with a good amount of force because it flew back a few feet before landing on the grass and taking off into the woods. The neighbor next to me, the one with the hose, opened his door and rushed to my car. He grabbed me, and we both sprinted into my house and slammed the door behind us, locking it up tight. I sank down to the floor with my back against the wall, attempting to catch my breath. My neighbor held out his hand to shake mine and said his name was Frank. I asked him what the fuck that thing was. He said that no one knows, but real late at night, that thing walks the streets, looking for any living thing that still remained outside. For reasons unknown, it has never broken into anyone's house, so it has become common knowledge around here to shut and lock your door every single night after sundown. When the first sightings started happening, the people of the Mill Village gathered together and decided that getting the police involved would be useless and only cause more problems. No one had been killed so far, but there was no doubt that the creature had sinister intentions for the townsfolk. Frank even said that pets would go missing here and there, most of them never to be seen again. The ones that did come back, though, never acted the same afterwards. I asked him why he was staring at me the day that I came to look at the house, and he said that he was just shocked to see someone new move in. Apparently no one new had moved into the Mill Village in over 20 years. Frank and I talked until the sun came up this morning. It was comforting having someone else around to experience all of this with. I didn't go into work today. I didn't even call in. I was paranoid and in shock from the horror I had witnessed last night. I sat on the couch in front of the TV all day long, unable to think of anything else. How could these people just accept that thing being out there, stalking the streets at night? The sun began to go down, so I grabbed the baseball bat that I kept by the front door for defense. I sat on the floor facing the front door, not taking my eyes off of it for a single second. Around 12:30 a.m., I heard the awful sound of a man screaming coming from outside. I shuddered at the thought of some poor bastard out there, possibly getting eaten alive by that thing. Around 1 a.m., my eyelids became rather heavy due to lack of sleep from the night before. I tried to keep my focus on the front door, but it was no use. I fell asleep. There were 3 knocks at the door. I opened my eyes and laid there, hoping it was part of a dream that I was having. 3 more knocks at the door. At this point, my heart was racing. I pulled out my phone to look at the time. 3:20 a.m. I crawled over to the front window, peered out, and let out a huge sigh of relief. It was Frank. I opened the door, grabbed him by the shoulders to pull him inside, and locked the door once again. I asked him what the hell he was doing out there, and was alarmed when I did not receive an answer. I examined him up and down and noticed that he looked a bit pale. I began to ask if he was okay, but was interrupted by a loud crunching noise. It was coming from Frank. I watched in absolute horror as his fingertips burst apart, making way for even longer, gray fingertips. The skin on his arms and legs stretched to the point that it started tearing in a patternless and blood-filled manner. His face stretched apart and tore in places that revealed eyes as black as death itself. Before the thing could finish bursting from its shell that was once Frank, I was able to run with all the sanity I had left into my bedroom. I hid in my closet and barricaded the door shut from the inside. It is now 3:36 a.m. I can hear it crashing throughout my house. It's getting closer. I am writing this, not as a cry for help, for I fear that it is too late for me, but as a warning for all of you. Stay inside at night, lock the doors, and most importantly, don't open your door for anyone after midnight. Story no. 3. I'm a cop, and I'm never working the night shift again. Alright, this next one, it hits different. It's called I'm a Cop, and I'm never working the night shift again. This next one, it hits different. It's called I'm a Cop, and I'm never working the night shift again. Being a cop at night is supposed to be boring, right? Just a dark road, an empty town, and a whole lot of nothing. But when the radio went silent, I knew something else was out there, listening. Working the graveyard shift as a cop sucks for a myriad of reasons. chief among them being the eeriness of the night. Now, saying that might make me sound like a baby considering that I'm no small dude, but it's true. Something about being stuck in your car, with no human life in sight, has an almost alien feeling to it. I'm sure it would help if I lived in an area that wasn't as heavily forested as Wyoming, but as it stands, if there's a light on near me, I almost can't see it with how dense the foliage is. Most nights, there's nothing to do. So it's just me in the silence. I usually take the time to catch up on a show I'm watching, or finish a book. On the off chance I do get a call, it's always something small, like a wellness check or a suspicious character outside a bar. I'm always happy to take these calls, though, as it gets me back towards populated areas, rather than some gravel road where they have me scouting for speeders. It's not an exciting job, but it pays the bills. It happened 2 days ago, on a relatively warm night. I was working my first night shift in a while, after getting back from vacation. Jimmy, the officer who replaced me while I was out, told me that he finally understood what I was talking about when I said it was creepy. I chuckled, assuring him that I would take over for a while, and advised him to bring something to do next time to keep his mind off it. If anyone were to understand what the transition from day to night shift was like, it would be me. So I tried to make him comfortable. After all, if he started taking them more, I wouldn't have to sit in the darkness as much. He handed me the keys, and I had an idea. This was the only night shift I was scheduled for that week. Why not make it a little more bearable? I decided to invite him along. He could either sit at a desk all night in a dimly lit precinct with only one other person, or hang out and shoot the shit in the cruiser. Honestly, I don't think the blinding white walls of the station are that much more comforting than the darkness, and I think he agreed, because he accepted the offer pretty quickly. We parked on one of our designated hiding spots and settled in, watching some shitty horror movie and cracking open a few beers. Sure, we shouldn't have been doing that, but who was gonna arrest us for it? We weren't small guys either, so it would take more than a couple of beers to get us tipsy. We also didn't expect to be moving much until my work phone rang. I sighed, rubbed my eyes, and answered it. It was already 3 a.m., so at least we'd made it halfway through the shift before something happened. I immediately heard giggling on the other end. I said hello a few times, and was about to hang up when I heard a voice on the other end of the line. It was Brian, the only other officer on duty that night, and he was in charge of manning the station's phone. Usually, he was as monotone as a depressed robot, so to hear him laugh was already weird. "Hey Tom, how's it going? I can't complain. Just living the high life with Jimmy here. What's up? You're not gonna believe this shit. I got an emergency call from the old Amic factory on Amshaban Road. How? That place doesn't have any power or phones even. That's why I'm laughing my ass off. The person who called said they broke into the place to try and steal equipment. And now they're somehow stuck inside. It was silent in the cruiser for a second. Jimmy and I slowly turned to look at each other, and then, almost simultaneously, we burst out laughing. "You're shitting me. I'm dead serious." When I got the call, I almost pissed myself trying not to laugh at the poor bastard. I'm about to piss myself right now. Hell, I think Jimmy already did. Jimmy jokingly slugged me in the shoulder as Brian began to talk again. "Anyways, do me a favor and go and help the guy get out of there. It's your choice whether you want to arrest him for trespassing or not. But he's had a bad enough night as is, by the sounds of it. We'll take care of it. Beats giving another speeding ticket. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to keep a straight face, though." I sure as shit wouldn't be able to. Give me a call back if you need backup. All right? I'll have to call the precinct up in Pinedale if you do. They have their parade this week, so I'm sure they've got a few guys to spare. Sounds good, Brian. We'll keep you posted. Boom. I hung up and flicked the cruiser's lights on, piercing through the darkness. We peeled out onto the road, making sure not to hit any deer along the way. It was only about a 10-minute drive, but you never know. We pulled into the bramble-covered entrance to the building, and I got out of the car to undo the rusted chain blocking the road. The place had been abandoned for 10 years, after a mech moved its drilling operations up north and took half the town's population with them. Now, the place was just a drinking spot for local teens, and it showed, with the amount of graffiti sprayed along the sides. We got out of the cruiser, flicked our flashlights on, and started looking for an entrance. Jimmy was noticeably on edge, probably because he didn't know this place existed. He was relatively new to the area, and I'm pretty sure this was his first time having to get out of the car on the night shift. Although I didn't ask. He went around the left side of the building, while I took the right, both of us looking for a rusted door or a busted window. I was peeling brambles off of my shorts when I heard Jimmy start yelling. I immediately hightailed it back towards the other side of the building, hand on my holster, preparing for the worst. Was this a trap? Maybe the dude we came here find was some sicko looking to hurt us, or worse. I sprinted around the corner, shining my flashlight in front of me, and expecting the worst. My flashlight illuminated Jimmy, who was doubled over laughing. I was confused, and immediately asked if he was all right. He looked up at me, with the widest grin I'd ever seen him sporting. I totally got you. I was relieved that nothing actually happened, but was mostly annoyed that he did that to me. It was almost 4:0 in the morning, for God's sake, and we were on the tail of some idiot in the middle of an abandoned warehouse. For a second, I thought he was getting attacked, and would be lying in a bloody heap by the time I got over to him. I think he saw that I was pissed, because his face immediately sank, and he started to apologize, saying he was just trying to lighten the mood. I took a deep breath and smiled at him. I assured him that I'd get him back at some point, and to just focus on getting in for now. We found a broken window that we assumed he'd climbed in through, and shined our flashlights on the floor inside to make sure we weren't about to step on nails or something. As we climbed into the place, I radioed Brian and asked him to call a few other officers over to us, just in case something went wrong. After the shit Jimmy pulled, I was on edge that something bad would actually happen, so I figured it was better to be safe than sorry. The power in the place still didn't work. In hindsight, I have no idea why I even bothered checking. So it looked like we were gonna have to put our flashlights to work. We called out a few times into the darkness, seeing if we'd get a response, but to no avail. We walked past the old drills and ore processors, our feet clicking against the concrete floor. After searching the bulk of the main room, we headed for the hallway at the very back of the factory. I knew this place pretty well, since I'd been called there during the daytime a few years back to clear out some drunk partiers who'd snuck in. Still, it was a whole different beast at night, and the fact that the hallway immediately branched into 3 more didn't help. This is where we made our first mistake, and it was a pretty stupid one. We decided to split up. I know. It's how horror movies start, and how characters die. But we were both tired, and our energy drinks were wearing off. We agreed that we'd keep our radios on at all times, and let each other know if we found the guy. At this point, I'd assumed that he'd found his way out and ran into the woods in fear of being arrested, but we still had to sweep the place just in case. I wasn't planning on arresting the guy, as I figured that he'd had a bad enough night at that point, and the old equipment he was planning on taking wasn't of any use to anyone anymore. So I would have let him off with a warning. Now, though, I was starting to change my mind. I didn't want to have to search the entire back half of this place, especially given the fact that there were 3 floors worth of rooms here. It didn't help that the building was split into 2 sides that weren't connected, so if one of us found something, the other would have to walk all the way over to them. I was starting to understand why this place wasn't used anymore. Every time I passed a room, I'd shine my flashlight in and call out. As evidenced by Jimmy's voice over the radio, he had a similar system going on. When I reached the first room of the 2nd floor, he was already on the 3rd. So I warned him to slow down a little bit, just to make sure that each room was completely clear. I was met with complete silence and repeated myself. Still, nothing. Hey, Tom, I see something. What is it? Down the hall from me. There's a hand sticking out of the doorway. I stopped in my tracks. What do you mean? There's a hand waggling its finger at me. I'll be right over. Don't go near it, don't do shit. Slowly back up, in fact. I started towards the stairs, admittedly slower than I should have. At this point, I was creeped out, but the rational side of me was still telling me that someone had gotten stuck and was motioning for Jimmy to come closer to help them. When I reached the 1st floor of my building, the other side of me started screaming at me to get moving, and that's the sigh I started listening to. As I approached the entrance to the other building, my radio suddenly erupted. Tom, what is it? There's a face. There's someone looking at me. I didn't respond. I just broke into a sprint towards the access door at the end of the hall. I grabbed the handle and pushed. It didn't budge. I rammed my shoulder into it, screaming Jimmy's name. Behind the door, I heard faint yelling. The door finally gave out, and I started sprinting up the dark staircase. I took my gun out of my holster. Whatever was going on up there, it wasn't good. I reached the entrance of the 3rd floor, and again, the door was locked. I bashed my shoulder into the door once again, calling his name. This time, though, there was no response, no screaming, just silence. I drew my pistol and unloaded almost the entire clip into the lock. The door still didn't budge. Something had to be blocking it from the other side. I slammed against the door so hard that things started flying off my belt. First my knife, then my taser, then my flashlight. I stopped for a second to pick it up, but it just kept rolling until it hit the edge of the stairwell and fell down. I couldn't see shit anymore, but I didn't have time to go get it. The door starting to push open, and I had to get through. I kicked it so hard, I thought I broke my ankle, but I didn't care. It finally caved in enough for me to slip through into the hallway. I once again called out Jimmy's name, and as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a light on at the end of the hallway. Not a flashlight, but a very dimly lit room. Standing in the doorway was a silhouette. It had to be him. I called out to him again, but didn't step closer. The silence was broken when the giggling started. It was faint enough that I couldn't tell if it was him, but it sounded like it. The giggling turned to laughter, and he started to move, but didn't leave the doorway. He was just moving in place, jerking from side to side. It looked like he was dancing. I lowered my gun and called out to him again. I knew what was happening. He was fucking with me. All of this was a setup to prank me again. I was royally pissed off and started screaming down the hallway. Are you fucking kidding me? I thought someone was attacking you, dude. I fucking told you earlier to stop messing around, and now you nearly give me a heart attack by doing this shit. What the fuck is wrong with you? put my gun back in my belt and turned back towards the door. I'd had more than enough for one night. I'm going outside to wait for the backup to get here, and going with them back to our station. When you're ready to stop fucking around, take the car, and don't talk to me for a week. This is seriously fucked up. Monday. I stormed out the broken door and picked up all of my stuff. I climbed back out through the window and stood in the darkness in front of the factory, waiting for backup to arrive. Luckily, they were well on their way already, and got there about 5 minutes after I got outside. I hopped into the back seat of their cruiser and buckled myself in. Whenever you're ready, you can drive me back to the station. It's 20 minutes down the main road. The officer behind the wheel turned to look at me, then turned back towards the wheel and pointed to the factory. Don't you want to wait for your partner? It looks like he's at the window up there. I rolled the window down and looked outside. Sure enough, there was a faint light coming from one of the windows. What looked to be a flashlight beam, illuminating someone's silhouette. I'll take our car back to the station. I'm pissed off at him right now, so he can take care of it. With a nod, the officer shifted into reverse, and we backed out onto the main road. Once we got back to the precinct, I thanked them for the lift, and immediately hopped into my truck and drove back home. I was exhausted, and didn't really care to wait for Jimmy to bring the car in. Jimmy didn't show up for work yesterday, and he didn't return the car either. Or he'd just taken a sick day and forgot to phone in. Or maybe he was scared to face me after his little prank backfired. Everyone I told about it seemed to be on my side. And maybe he knew I'd tell people about it. So I thought he was afraid of corrective action. At least, that was my theory yesterday. He didn't show up today either. And everyone started to get a bit worried. Even me. We sent a couple of officers out to the factory to see if he had left in the cruiser, or took an Uber home and left it there. Sure enough, it was parked in the same spot. When they saw this, they phoned me to come in to help search the area, just in case. It was my day off, so I was irritated, but I did hope he was okay. So I relented. We searched the entire factory, and didn't find anything until we got to the third-floor hallway that we'd been on a few days ago. I got up the stairs last, and found one officer vomiting in the corner of the stairwell, and the other shielding his eyes in disgust. I pushed past them and walked into the hallway. The floor was stained with a trail of blood leading towards the end of the hall. There, hanging from the doorway, was Jimmy. He'd been absolutely mangled. His stomach was eviscerated, and his eyes and tongue were missing. Most notably, though, were his arms and legs. The veins had been almost completely ripped from them, and braided so tightly together that they formed makeshift ropes. Seeing this, I didn't immediately join the other officer in vomiting. I just stood there, completely stunned. That changed, though, when I walked into the room behind his body. Above him, attached to the doorway, was a makeshift pulley system. A system that his veins had been run through, almost like he was a puppet. Dory, no. 4. Just one thing. Don't go outside at night. This next one, listen closely. It's called Just One Thing. This next one, listen closely. It's called Just One Thing. Don't go outside at night. Some warnings sound silly, until you realize they exist for a reason. When the sun goes down, the rules change. And if you break them, you might not live to regret it. But sorrow. When my mom asked me to watch her house again, I jumped at it. Everything she wants me to do is easy. Clean, cook, and Water her plants, let the dogs out, and make sure they have food and water. Simple enough. This wasn't my first time watching her house while her and her boyfriend went out of town. It wasn't until she ended her lecture with "Oh, and also don't go outside at night anymore," that made me start to second guess watching it. I mean, my brother would be there, but with Mom and my brother's fiance and kids out of town, he'd be drinking and partying it up at friends. My boyfriend couldn't come with me and he'd be at home with our dogs. So basically that left me to fend for myself. My initial thought was my mom lives out in the boonies of Mississippi, so maybe she's scared about those stupid clown in the woods rumors. Considering her house is back in the woods with a long driveway out in the middle of nowhere, it can be a scary thought. She has crappy Wi-Fi because no one offers service out there. Her nearest neighbor, Homer, lives about a mile away, and the nearest town is Holly Springs, and that's 35 minutes away. So, if something happens, you're pretty much fucked. Anyways, I asked her why I couldn't go out at night. I went out last time I watched her house, and we had to let the dogs out before bed. So what the heck? She looked at me and started to cry. Here's the story she told me. "Thanks, Mom. Clint and I were letting the dogs out 2 nights ago. You know how they usually are, chasing anything and everything." Mia was sitting beside me on the back patio watching Bella and Maddie sniff around for squirrels and rabbits to catch. Mia is a small inside dog. She's a puppy. Bella is a huge white lab, and Maddie is a pit bull mix. They are not scared of anything. All of a sudden, Maddie stopped and looked into the woods with her ears cocked. She started growling and Bella joined her. I thought they sniffed a rabbit until I saw something big moving. When I say big, I mean, I thought it was a person, but I couldn't make out what, because it stayed behind the tree line in the dark, just out of sight. I called for them, and they stood there, hair up, ears back, growling. You know these dogs. You know how they act. So when I heard a deep growl coming from the woods and saw them run tail tucked and whining, I instantly started yelling for Clint. He grabbed his gun and came running out of the house looking around. Then it looked at me, confused. When I explained what happened, he started aiming the gun towards the woods, asking who was there. All of a sudden we saw these eyes, these wolf-like eyes. They were yellow, and I swear, as crazy as this sounds, they seem to see into your soul. I've never been so scared in my life. We went inside and locked everything. We brought the dogs in from the garage. Never in my life have I been so scared. And that night we heard scratching on the house, and the dogs started whimpering. We survived, but I learned Homer was out getting some last-minute work done before bed. Lisa heard him scream and ran outside to see him on the ground by the tree line. Something big growling and eating him. Something was eating him. Clarissa, something big was eating this 6'3" built man's stomach. Lisa ran inside and called the cops. Of course, an hour and a half later they came, but Homer was gone. He was picked clean to his backbone. Something ate his chest to his hips. The cops can't identify what it was. It's like nothing they've seen before. And the worst part, it comes back every night. We don't go out at night anymore. As soon as the sun sets, we are inside, doors locked and guns ready. Randy and Trisha come home early now and make sure Liz and Bean are in bed before it comes. It knocks on the door, scratches at the house, growls by windows, and even talks. It talks Clarissa. It mimics voices and acts like a child who needs help to try and get us to come outside. So please, if you hear anything, do not go outside at night. So needless to say, I'm terrified. She's upped it to $400 to watch her house, and my brother will be home with me. Update. I don't know if she's trying to scare me or if she's being honest. Today is my first night, and I really wish I had my boyfriend and Husky here. I'm counting down the hours until night, and my brother has a shotgun and a hunting rifle beside him. My boyfriend says it's just a wild dog or coyote, and they are hyping it up. It's 10:43 a.m., 9 hours, until pitch black darkness. Story no. Okay, this next one. It's not just scary, it's disturbing. I thought my boyfriend was the love of my life, until I discovered he was drugging me at night. Love is built on trust. But what if the person you trust most is the one making sure you never wake up? Some nightmares don't happen while you sleep. They happen when you wake up. Trying to get out of bed for work was almost impossible, which was strange for me, because I was always a high-energy sort of person. A few hours of sleep and I was always good to go. I was at a loss as to what was happening. After a barrage of tests, even my doctor couldn't find anything wrong with me. The only recent change in my life was my boyfriend who had moved in, and I was sharing a bed for the first time in my life. Steven was the first love of my life, and this was my first serious relationship. I didn't want to spoil things by making him sleep in the spare room. I liked having Steven around. He made a real fuss over me, and he would bring me chamomile tea every night before bed. The pain in my hip was sharp and pulsated up the right side of my body. I jumped from my bed and nearly collapsed to the floor as I struggled to get to the bathroom. "Steven, can you get in here?" I cried. A big dark bruise covered my hip, as if I was assaulted in my sleep with a metal bar. "What's wrong?" Steven said as he came rushing into the bathroom. Did I fall out of bed or something? Steven had a weird expression on his face. I could swear he looked guilty about something. Probably, I don't know. His response was dismissive, which sent my brain spiraling with all sorts of thoughts. This is not normal. Steven, I think there's something wrong with me. You should probably see a doctor then, he coldly said before quickly leaving the bathroom. My doctor was still at a loss and suggested I should see someone who could rule out anything nefarious. Steven was still dismissive of me as we drove to the hospital. I'm sure it's nothing. You're probably just stressed from work. People don't wake up with bruises over stress, I angrily thought to myself. The doctor at the hospital took my blood and did all sorts of tests on me, including a stress test. I should have been happy when the tests came back clear, but it only made me feel like I was losing my mind. Something was definitely wrong with me. I would prescribe you sedatives, but your blood work shows you are already on nitrazepam, explained the doctor. I was dumbstruck and wasn't sure what the doctor was talking about. I have never taken so much as a painkiller in my life. The doctor's face looked how I felt. He took out his charts and looked over them again. No. You definitely tested positive for nitrazepam, which is a powerful sedative. Later that evening, as I sat in bed, a million different thoughts ran through my head. How was that even possible? I thought to myself. As I sat there, Steven walked in with my chamomile tea, and just as I was about to put it to my lips, I was struck by the most unnerving thought. The realization that my boyfriend was drugging me hit me like a ton of bricks and filled me with a dread I had never felt before. I emptied the contents of the cup down the sink in the bathroom before jumping back into bed. Was it hot enough for you? Asked Steven as he jumped into bed beside me. Perfect as always. I felt as if I was lying beside a complete stranger. Had I ever really known him? I thought to myself, as I lay there terrified he was doing unimaginable things to me while I slept. I must have drifted off at some stage because when I woke up the room was a mess, and Stephen was nowhere to be seen. My body ached all over, and it felt like I was in a fight. What the hell was he doing to me in my sleep? I thought. I had made the decision to go to the police, but I needed evidence, or it was just my word against his. I had purchased a hidden camera and set it up in the bedroom, pointing it towards the bed. I woke up exhausted as usual, which unfortunately meant you had done something to me while I slept, but I had it on camera. I opened my laptop to check the footage. For the first couple of hours of sleep, nothing happened. For a moment I had hoped I was imagining everything until I watched myself jolt from the bed. At first, I couldn't believe what I was doing. It felt like I was watching a horror movie as I watched myself crawl up the bedroom wall like some possessed demon. I continued to crawl up the wall onto the ceiling, looking down over Stephen like I was ready to pounce on him. Stephen woke, and it was strange watching him because it was like he was prepared for what was happening and didn't seem fazed by it. He took a stick out from under the bed as I pounced from the ceiling above, and he spent the next hour fighting me off. I watched as he subdued me on the bed before pulling out handcuffs and cuffing me to the bed. I looked at the marks on my wrists, which made sense now. As soon as Stephen came home from work, I ran and threw my arms around him. "Why didn't you tell me what you were going through every night?" Stephen shrugged his shoulders. "I thought you knew, and usually the drugs I was giving you made things a little easier. Why are you even still with me? My last girlfriend was a jealous psychopath. You were a walk in the park compared to her. Story no." This one is for anyone who's ever driven alone at night. It's called "I Took a Drive Late One Night. What happened will haunt me forever." The road ahead is empty. The road behind is silent. But what if you weren't alone out there? What if someone or something was waiting for you to stop? Before I forget, man, I was wondering if you could help me with something. The cashier, an acne-riddled kid who looked to be in his late teens or early 20s, looked up from shoving the bag of potato chips, 2 sodas, and a pack of Lucky Strikes into a plastic bag. For a moment, he just stood there, seemingly frozen in mid-action. Then, he finally answered, "Yeah, what's up, man?" I let out a barely perceptible sigh. I'd been half afraid that I would be told to take a long walk off a short pier, to put it politely. Feeling relieved, I reached into my back pocket for what was there. You see, I seem to have, well, sort of gotten lost out here. I decided to take a late-night drive and ended up getting turned around on all these 2-lane back roads. I unfolded the map and set it on the counter so he and I could both see it before continuing. So, I was hoping you could point out on here roughly where we are, and, more importantly, the way to get back to the main road. There was another long stretch of silence, and then the kid began to laugh, softly at first, and then louder. "Dude, a paper map," he managed out between wheezes. "Are you for real? What year do you think this is? 1993? For my part, I simply let out a resigned sigh. I'd had a bad feeling I would be getting this sort of reaction from someone his age, and it looked like I'd been proven correct. Can't say I didn't see it coming. He wiped tears from the corners of his eyes and looked at me. "Seriously, bro, don't you have GPS in your car or something?" he asked. Immediately, I hooked a thumb over my shoulder, pointing out the glass entry door at the beige sedan sitting at the gas pumps. Not in a Honda Accord from 1979, I replied simply. As he looked behind me out the door, I could see he wanted to make another quip, probably something about how I should buy a newer car. Thankfully, though, he kept it to himself. Instead, he leaned over the map and, still chuckling softly to himself, began looking at it. A few moments later, he snapped his fingers. I still got it, he said proudly, then pushed his finger down near the middle of the map and looked up at me. We're right about here, roughly 6 or 7 miles outside Placer. I leaned over the counter to see as he drew his finger away. Here, he nodded, and I pulled a pen out of my pocket, circling the area as a reminder once I left, then examined the map further. Okay, so it seems I could take more than a few roads to get back to Interstate 5, right? The kid nodded again, clearly already bored with the unusual interaction by the slightly annoyed look which had begun to cross his face. Sure, he said simply, then placed my bagged items on top of the map. That'll be $14.50 for this, and $28.50 for the gas. I reached into my pocket and pulled my wallet out, withdrawing 3 20s and handing them to him. The register let out its trademark ding as it shot open, and he placed the bills in it before pulling out and handing me my change. Placing it and my wallet back into my pocket, I picked up the bag and folded the map back up. Thanks for the help, I said, as I turned to head out the door. Yeah, no problem, I heard him mutter at me as I crossed to the front door and pushed it open. A small bell hung from the inside handle jangled as I stepped outside and let the door swing shut behind me. The sounds of the refrigerators humming and the fluorescent lights softly buzzing was replaced by those of a summertime forest at night. Crickets and cicadas buzzed loudly in the grass around the store, almost overwhelming the buzzing sound of the lights over the pumps. The sound of an owl hooting loudly echoed through the trees, followed by the loud call of what had to be an elk. I inhaled the clean air before heading down the steps from my car. Pulling open the driver's door, I took one last look around before dropping into the driver's seat. So, did you find out where we are? Asked a voice from the passenger seat. For a split second, a wave of confusion and panic swept over me, and I spun in my seat. It was immediately replaced by a wave of embarrassment, amplified as my friend began to let out a deep laugh. Dude, were you in there that long that you forgot I was out here waiting for you? Not wanting to admit I had done just that, I shook my head. Nah, bro, not that. Just dealing with the kid in there was a major headache. He nodded sympathetically. Craig was one of my close friends. Ever since we'd met each other, we'd immediately clicked and had stuck with each other from that point on. And one thing we both loved to do was take late-night drives to nowhere. Simply driving around with no destination in mind, listening to the radio, and occasionally sharing a joint one of us would buy. This is the first time we've ever gotten lost, though. I reached into the bag, pulling out the bottle of Mr. Pibb and handing it to him. Here, I said simply, before pulling the Lucky Strikes out and chucking the rest into the back seat. Pulling the key from my pocket, I slid it into the ignition and turned it, the car's buzzer sounding as the dash lights came on. A moment later, the inline four quietly rumbled to life with its traditional burble. Tearing open the packaging, I pulled a cigarette from the pack and stuck it into the corner of my mouth before reaching to push in the car's cigarette lighter. As I did, I shot a glance back towards the store and froze. A small shiver shot down my spine as I realized the kid was standing at the door and staring out at us. What the actual hell? Craig caught my gaze and turned to look himself. Dude, what the hell is his problem? I shook my head as the lighter popped back out, signaling it was ready to use. I pushed the glowing red coil against the tip of the smoke for a moment, until it was lit, then placed it back in its slot. I pulled it from my lips and exhaled a cloud of smoke before answering, feeling more than a bit unnerved. I don't know, but honestly, man, that's more than a bit creepy. I shot one last glance. The kid hadn't even blinked once. He was just staring with an off-putting intensity out the glass. Come on, let's get out of here, Craig said, echoing the thoughts swimming through my mind. I put the car into first gear and eased off the clutch, the car beginning to roll forward. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him turn and shoot the bird at the kid as we slid out from under the lights into the dark. Prick, I heard him mumble. I turned the car left and began heading back the way we came. Well, the good thing is, yeah, I did find out where we are. I pulled the map from my pocket and handed it to my friend. I heard him fumbling for a moment, and then a small flashlight clicked on as he aimed it at the map. Dude, how did we make it almost as far east as Placer? He asked with a slightly astonished tone. Longer drive than normal, I guess, I answered, rolling down my window to flick the ashes from my smoke out. I shot a glance at the analog clock on the dashboard. 2:45 it read. I let out a small sigh. Great. Vanessa is likely worrying up a storm about us right now. Me, especially. Ever since we'd started dating 5 years ago, my girlfriend had always been rather apprehensive about my habit of taking long, late-night drives when I couldn't sleep. She always feared I'd get into an accident, either with another car, wrap my Honda around a tree, or hit an animal. Most of the time, I'd come home to find her sitting up waiting for me, worry clearly etched into her beautiful sapphire eyes. I bit my lip slightly. Hey, you think I should text Vanessa and let her know we're okay? I asked Craig. I heard him let out a snort. Honestly, bro, no. I know the woman loves you to death, and I'm happy she cares so much, but she's got to learn you know what you're doing. Plus, you two need your space. It's not healthy how much time you two spend together. I flicked the remnants of the cigarette out the window and let out a snort of my own. It's called being in love, dude. You should try it sometime, I joked, causing him to let out a laugh. Nah, thanks. I enjoy being single too much. Shaking my head, I stared out the windshield as the headlights guided our way. I felt a slight sense of unease creep up on me as I watched the two-lane road stretch out before us, the moon in the sky almost completely blocked by the trees over our heads. I hadn't seen another car on the road for 2 hours, at least. Well, what did you expect, Derek? You drove into the boonies. There's only ghost towns out here. Why don't you try driving all the way to Idaho next time? Shaking my thoughts away, I fumbled in the center console for a moment before pulling out a mixtape. A bit of music would help me feel better. I pushed it into the car's cassette player and hit play. A moment later, the pounding bass and synths of Dance with the Dead's That House began blasting from the speakers. Craig let out a whoop of excitement. Dude, yes, that's the kind of tunes we need for a drive like this. He rolled down the passenger window, sticking his head out the window to whoop and holler into the night. I shook my head, unable to keep from grinning at his antics. Friggin' goofball. The playful mood helped settle my mind, and I felt myself relax into the seat, the tension flowing out of my body and out the window. For a few minutes, that's how things went. the road stretching out ahead of us and then disappearing into the blackness behind us, the music blasting out from the radio, and the soft roar of the engine in the background. I shot another look at the backlit clock. Now, it read 5 minutes to 3. We should be at the highway in a minute. The thought released the last wisps of tension in my body and fumbled into the back seat for the bag, catching it with the tips of my fingers. I pulled my bottle of soda from it and, holding the bottle to the steering wheel, cracked the cap. I lifted it to my lips and took a swig, taking my eyes off the road for a split second to tilt my head back. I looked back at the road and nearly spit it all out onto the windshield. In the second I'd stopped looking, a figure had stepped out onto the road. Fucking hell, I shouted, jamming my feet on the brake and clutch as hard as I could. The rear wheels of the car locked up, and the ear-piercing sound of squealing tires filled the cabin. To my horror, the tail end of the car began sliding out. No. For a few seconds, the world around us became a blur of shapes and colors, and I feared at any moment would smash into a tree or begin rolling. Thankfully, the car finally came to a stop with a screech of protest from the suspension. We were facing back the way we'd come. I could tell from the black lines on the road which had once been the rubber of my tires. I gripped the steering wheel with almost a death grip, my heart furiously pounding in my chest. My breaths came in short, ragged gasps. There was no movement in the car for a few seconds before Craig reached forward and snapped the music off. "Dude, what the fuck?" he shouted at me, his face looking as pale as mine must be. I didn't say a word to him. Instead, I pulled up on the handbrake, ripped off my seatbelt and practically kicked the door open. Stepping out onto the pavement, I stepped to the front of the car on unsteady legs until I was squarely in between the headlight beams. I looked around, first at the road ahead, then at the forest on either side. There was nothing there. What the? I turned and looked behind me. Over the roof of the car, the red glow of the taillights illuminated a few feet ahead, but beyond that, nothing but blackness. I turned again, looking out at the darkness beyond the branches. No movement disturbed the bushes and branches, and aside from the quiet hum of the car's engine, it was silent. I shook my head. Did I just imagine things? I shook it again. No, I know for a fact I didn't hallucinate. There was someone there. The sound of the car door opening made me turn, seeing Craig step out of the car. Leaving the door open, he immediately came over to me. "You have exactly 20 seconds to explain to me what the hell just happened before I lose it, bro," he exclaimed. For a second, I fought to find my voice. Then I answered. Dude, I'm not crazy. Someone stepped out of the woods and onto the road. It looked like a chick. I thought I was gonna freaking hit her. I realized I'd been holding in a breath and let it out, trying desperately to get myself to relax. Craig gave me a confused look. "You serious, man?" I nodded. He pulled the flashlight he'd used to look at the map from his pocket and flicked it on, aiming it first at the tree line on one side of the road, then the other. After doing this a few times, he turned back to me. "Well, whoever it was, they're not there anymore." His brow furrowed. "But why would a chick be out here in the middle of nowhere?" he muttered, more to himself than me. I still answered, "I don't know, man. It's freaking Josephine County. For as many good people live out here, there's also a bunch of weirdos." I heard my friend let out a snort of laughter in reply, but something had caught my attention. A feeling which had slammed into me with all the weight of a Peterbilt. The feeling of eyes boring into the back of my skull. I spun around, looking back towards the car and seeing nothing there. But the feeling remained, and I didn't like it one bit, especially when the feeling came again. This time from the direction I'd just been facing a moment ago. Realization dawned on me, and I felt a chill ripple through me, along with the flicker of fear and realization. Oh, shit, I whispered. Craig turned to look at me. What? He asked, seeing the look on my face. He repeated, what? I looked up at him, speaking with a bit of a weak voice. Let's get back in the car right now. He didn't argue, thankfully. He was already moving for the open passenger door, and I matched his pace as the feeling of being watched intensified, as if someone were rapidly approaching from the woods. Oh, hell. I broke. First into a run, then a full-out sprint for the last 10 feet, tearing at the door handle and practically launching myself into the driver's seat. Slamming the door closed behind me, I jammed down on the door lock, seeing Craig do the same. He turned to me, his face hidden in the dark, but his voice giving a perfect mental image of it. What the hell was that man? The tone of it gave away the fact he'd felt, even for the briefest of moments, the same feeling of dread and fear I'd had. You remember those videos of people driving on empty roads in the middle of the night, only to have someone step into the road and get them to stop? I asked. A sharp intake of breath came from the passenger seat before he answered, finishing my thought. And then a bunch of people spring out of the woods trying to ambush them. Oh, hell no. My thoughts exactly. Time to friggin' leave. I released the parking brake, pulling on my seatbelt and jamming the car into first gear. The tires chirped as I hit the gas, and a moment later, we were accelerating away. As we did, the feeling of being watched rapidly fell away to nothing, and I allowed myself to let out a relieved sigh. We drove in silence for another few minutes before I finally spoke again. I think we're in the clear, man. Craig let out a soft laugh. Thank fuck for that. I nodded, then reached for the soda which had fallen, wedging itself by the parking brake. Snatching it up, I uncapped it and took another swig, the still cool liquid invigorating me a bit. Recapping and dropping it behind me into the back seat, I let a laugh of my own. I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, Craig, but I think after this, I may take a bit of a break from late night drives. This just got under my skin too much for a few moments. There was nothing, and then he answered. As much as that sucks, bro, I can understand. No problem at all. I thought I could detect a small tone of sadness in his voice, along with something else I couldn't place. But then, I heard him sit up straight. Hey, Jake, he asked, a bit of a concerned tone now etched into it. Yeah. I heard him draw another breath. Shouldn't we be to the highway by now? Or at least see the lights of passing cars? I hadn't been fully concentrating on anything except the next stretch of road and my headlights, but at his words, I jerked my head to look beyond them. What the actual hell? He was right. The lights of cars and trucks flashing by on the freeway should be visible through the dark. I clearly remembered looking at my side view mirror as we turned onto the road from the highway, seeing the ever-present white and red glows zipping by at close to the same distance we were now. That wasn't the case anymore. All I could see in front of us was darkness. Darkness and the woods on either side of the road. For a moment, I lifted my foot off the accelerator, letting the car slow down a little as my brain whirred. He's gotta be mistaken. Hell, I've gotta be mistaken. We just haven't gotten close enough to the highway yet. You know these old roads, Derek. They often end up longer than they first look. Feeling somewhat relieved by the idea, I said it out loud. Craig nodded, but I could tell he wasn't completely convinced. And, for that matter, as much as I repeated it mentally to myself, I couldn't completely convince myself either. It was as if seeing the woman step in the road had shaken me more than I'd first thought. Pushing back down on the gas, I shifted into fourth gear and watched the speedometer flirt with 55 miles an hour. For a few minutes more, neither one of us saw anything as we drove in silence. And then, Craig let out a cry. There. A light. For a moment, a surge of hope welled up inside me, and I craned over the steering wheel, looking to see the highway. It was dashed as I saw. It was only a streetlight, standing solitary guard on the side of the road. Beneath it stood an old, worn sign, which seemed to have been shot at many times with both BBs and actual bullets. I slowed the car some as it came towards us, so I could read it, and felt confusion fall over me. Golden, 2 miles. The fuck? Craig breathed out as he read the sign. It passed by us, the streetlight momentarily bathing the interior of the car in light and showing the confused, worried look on his face. How the hell did we end up by Golden? Golden is a ghost town, one which attracts visitors every year to check out the standing buildings. It was a mining town which had a population of a few hundred people, but once the prospects dried up in the early to mid-20th century, it became the ghost town it is today. Its biggest claim to fame nowadays was being featured on Ghost Adventures a few years back. Craig repeated his question, but I wasn't able to answer him. My thoughts were racing. Inside my head, there's no freaking way. Golden is miles to the north of Placer. There are no roads connecting the two areas, from what I saw on the map. Not to mention, we've been driving in a straight line since leaving the gas station. I honestly don't know, man. I finally answered, my voice conveying how rattled I truly was. In the car's dark interior, I saw him put his head in his hands. I fumbled for my pack of cigarettes, pulling another out with slightly unsteady fingers, and pushing in the cigarette lighter. A moment later, the turn-off for the ghost town flashed by on the right. I saw the dark, hulking shape of the church's spire rising out of the dark for a moment. Then it was behind us. The lighter popped out, and I pressed it to the smoke, lighting it and putting it back. I decided I needed to try and calm the rising tension that was filling the car's interior. Look, however we ended up here, man, the fact is, we can't be far now from the highway. So, let's just keep our wits about us, keep calm, and when we get back to my place, me and Vanessa can have a good laugh over this. Sound good? I heard my friend take a deep breath, then let it out in a whoosh. Okay, yeah, that sounds like a plan. He let out a soft laugh, and I felt him pat my shoulder. Thanks, Derek. You are seriously a good friend. Glad I've got you. I nodded, then realized he may not be able to see it in the dark. No problem, man. I said. I looked at the clock. 3 M. Bah. Only 5 minutes had passed since I'd last looked at it. And yet, it felt more like it'd been 30. Time seems different when you're stressed. For a few minutes, there was only darkness. And then, a light appeared in the distance. Ha! There we go, I exclaimed. I waited to see the sign for the on-ramp appear, and felt a mixture of confusion and disbelief as the sign for Golden flew by again. Wow. Craig didn't say anything, but I felt him stiffen in the passenger seat, showing he'd seen it as well. As the streetlight and sign disappeared behind us, a feeling began to creep up on me. Another bolt of electricity shot up my spine as I realized that it was the same feeling I'd had when we'd gotten out of the car. The feeling of eyes on me. My eyes shifted to the blur of trees on either side of the car, but I saw no one. Then off for the ghost town approached again. I heard Craig let out another deep breath. "Derek, pull over, please," he said simply. His voice was shaking, and as much as I didn't want to stop, I did as he asked, pulling over just before the turn-off. He ripped his seatbelt off, shoving the door open and stepping out. I watched him stride to the front of the car and stand there for a minute. He seemed to start shaking a bit, and I realized just how much this was getting to him. I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached for the door handle when I glanced at the clock and froze. The clock was still showing 3 a.m. The hands hadn't moved at all. A feeling of shock washed over me like a wave as I tapped it with my fingers to see if it was merely stuck. But it refused to begin moving again. Oh, okay. What the actual fuck is going on? I whispered to myself. I reached into my pocket, fishing out my phone and flipping it open. Like the clock, it too showed the time as 3 a.m. The feeling of being watched began to intensify, and I glanced at Craig standing in the dark before looking down, beginning to type a text out to Vanessa. "Hey, baby girl. Just wanted to let you know that Craig and I are okay. We're trying to get back to the highway, but I've gotten a bit turned around out here. Do me a favor, and if I don't text you again in 15 minutes, text me back, okay? I love you." I replaced the phone in my pocket. I knew I should have been more honest, but I was beginning to feel a little freaked out about the weird situation. I didn't want to worry her any more than necessary, as it would worsen my own mental state. Pushing open the door, I got out and walked around, stopping near the front right headlight. "Dude, you alright?" I asked after a moment. He didn't answer, but happily, he seemed to have stopped shaking. I repeated my question. When he didn't answer my second and third calls, I began to feel a new sensation creep up on me. A potent mixture of dread and fear. "Craig, dude, you creeping me the fuck out. Please say something." He finally turned to look at me, and in the semi-glow of the headlights, I saw his face had gone a bit pale. He raised a finger and pointed, saying only a single word. "Look." My eyes followed where he had gestured, and I began to feel like I was standing under a freezing cold waterfall. The cigarette dangling from my lips fell from my mouth to the ground. Standing about 50 feet away, just inside the tree line, was a figure. It was drenched in gloom, but with a gasp, I realized it was the same woman who'd nearly caused me to wreck. "Oh, fuck me sideways, man." I swallowed, finding my voice. We should get back in the car, Craig." He nodded almost immediately. "I think you might be right," he answered, his voice wavering. Not taking our eyes off the figure, we slowly backed up until we reached our respective doors and climbed in. I didn't even bother pulling my seatbelt on. I just jammed the gear shifter into first and floored it. Dirt and gravel kicked out behind us, and the car shot forward onto the road. This time, I didn't let up on the gas. I kept my foot hard down, the engine beginning to roar as I shifted into third and fourth. The speedometer reached 60 as I shifted into fifth gear, the feeling of being watched intensifying with each passing second. I prayed that I would see something, anything ahead of us. An intersection, a house, a freaking out-of-use payphone, for fuck's sake. And then my blood turned to ice as a light appeared ahead of us, the exact same one as before, with the sign underneath. My eyes flickered to the clock, and terror shot through me as I saw it still was frozen at the same time. "This isn't good, bro," Craig said it from the passenger seat. I agreed with him, but didn't say it out loud. I kept my foot to the floor, the speedometer now hitting 80. The turnoff appeared again, and what I saw made my heart begin to pound erratically. The woman had gotten closer to the road, and she wasn't alone anymore. Behind her, I saw others, the outlines of other people in the dark. Dozens, possibly more. They all stood, facing the road, watching us fly by, and then they disappeared into the rearview mirror. Fuck. I breathed out as the light and sign flashed by yet again. This time, the mass of people had gotten even closer to the road. The woman stood in front of them, and for a split second, the headlights illuminated her. Another flash of ice shot through my veins as I saw the river of blood pouring down the front of her nightgown, a style that looked to be decades old. "What the hell do we do?" Craig asked me, his voice steady, yet filled with fear. The same I felt. I just shook my head. "I don't know, man," was all I could say. The streetlight was beginning to appear again when I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket, causing me to nearly slam on the brakes in surprise. I fumbled in my pocket for it, seeing Craig look over at me. I texted Vanessa when we stopped, told her to reply back in a few minutes. Now, I think I'm just gonna tell her to call the cops or something. He didn't reply, instead turning to look out the windshield at the approaching light, flicking my eyes from the phone screen as I flipped it open to the road and back. I forced myself not to look at the turnoff as we zoomed past the light. I didn't want to see how close those, whatever they were, had gotten. My fingers trembled, almost causing me to drop it as I hit the OK button on the notification icon. The light beginning to appear once more. Vanessa's message automatically opened, and for a moment, relief like I'd never felt before surged through me at the small bit of normalcy I had in my grasp. I froze. I didn't even look up at the road. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on the single sentence, reading and rereading it. Endless waves of confusion passed over me. Enough I spoke aloud. The fuck? Craig spoke up. What'd she say? I didn't answer him. My mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour, trying to understand. But it was like I was repeatedly hitting a mental wall. I tried to think of something else as another thought came to me. But again, the same block was coming to me. As it did, a new wave of fear began to rise. One for an entirely new reason, then the terrifying loop flying by outside. The speedometer now showed we were doing 90. And then, Craig spoke. "Can I ask you a question, man?" Fear coursed through every vein in my body. Not at his question, but at his voice. It was different. Gone was the fear and tension it had held. Not even a minute ago. Now, he just sounded calm. No, not simply calm. I couldn't understand why. But the way his tone was, it almost made me feel like he was smiling. Another shiver cascaded up my spine as I finally forced myself to answer, my mouth dry as cotton. "What?" he answered as we began to fly under the streetlight. "Are you scared?" For whatever reason, the question made me turn to look at him, just as the light whizzed over us. For a split second, the car's interior became illuminated again. My eyes locked with his. The light flew by. The turn-off appeared again, and for a moment, my eyes flicked up to see that the woman was right next to the road, bathed completely in the headlights. I finally caught a glimpse of her face. And then I was screaming, my fingers tearing at the door handle as the car swerved to the right. I saw a tree flying towards the windshield. I didn't think. I just forced the door open and leapt out. The ground rapidly flew up to meet me. Darkness. I woke up in a hospital room, a bandage covering my head and one arm in a sling. My chest felt like it was on fire as well. The first thing I saw was Vanessa, who, upon seeing me wake up, burst into tears and wrapped her arm around me. A few moments later, the doctor came in. He told me that I was a lucky man. Apparently, I'd gotten away with only a gash in my head requiring staples, severely bruised ribs, and a broken arm. Shocking for having dove out of a car at what appeared to be tremendous speed, he said, raising an eyebrow. Then he told me the police wanted to speak to me. He showed them in, and 2 officers entered, asking me many questions. I told them exactly what had happened. Well, except for 2 small details. Anyways, they appeared to take my account seriously and promised to look into it. We've had some reports similar to yours, sir, one of them answered tentatively. Then they told me how I'd been found. How a father and son who owned a gas station nearby had been out driving and had come across first my destroyed Honda, which had wrapped itself around a tree and then some, and then, lying unconscious in the grassy ditch, me. They didn't say who they'd been, but I had a fair idea. The son at least anyways. That night was 3 months ago. I've been at home, resting and healing this entire time. It's given me plenty of time to think, plenty of time to process everything. I try not to think about that night, about any of it. I feel like I'll go insane if I do, especially after the police told me that they found nobody else at the scene of the wreck, only the passenger door hanging open. But I've had to, after receiving an email from an unknown address, one claiming to be the son, the kid I saw in the gas station that night. He told me things that his father told him he'd seen for years, that he didn't believe at all, until that night, when he looked out the door at my car. That's when he'd frantically called his father. As I type this out, I feel the threads of my sanity begin to pull away from each other, threatening to split. Remembering the woman's face, indeed a ghost, as it flashed in the headlights. The look of horror plastered there as she frantically waved at me to get my attention. The same look the others must have had. Remembering turning to look at Craig as the light flickered over, and seeing the smile on his face. A smile wider than any humans could possibly be, filled with shark-like teeth as black eyes stared hungrily at me. The same smile the kid told me he'd been flashed as I'd pulled away. But mostly, I remember the single line of text Vanessa sent me, what caused me to rack my brain, trying frantically to recall my friendship with the figure sitting opposite me, and horror filling me as I realized I couldn't think of one single memory. What will keep me from ever taking And finally, this last one is the kind of story that sticks with you, the kind you wish you never heard. But here we go. Sometimes you don't find horror. Horror finds you. And once it does, there's no way back. Every night, my girlfriend wakes me up to tell the exact same joke. Before I start, I feel like I should let something very clear. I absolutely love Ellen. We've been living together for about 3 years now, but have known each other our whole lives. In fact, we were childhood friends, and I know this may sound like a fairy tale to some people, but it truly felt like we were always destined to be together. Even after graduation, when we started dating other people, it only felt truly right when we were with each other. So I don't know what took me so long to ask her out. but I'm really glad I did. We have the same taste in music, movies, and even food. We laugh at the same dumb jokes and know exactly how to comfort each other in times of need. She's the kindest, most gentle and loving girl I ever met. We've even been talking about our plans for marriage and how we would like to have kids of our own. That's why it hurt so much how it all went terribly wrong in just 4 nights. I would also like to preface that Ellen doesn't have much of a family other than me, and some very distant aunts that she never met and doesn't even know their names. I was born a big family with 4 siblings and plenty of cousins that were always visiting and even helping out when we got in trouble. Ellen has none of that. She doesn't have any siblings, and her father was an alcoholic, abusive freak that died when she was young. Her mother was a very kind and inspiring person that took care of the family by herself for many years, and almost a second mother to myself. So when she passed away last year, it hurt us both for a long time. But Ellen stayed strong. She's not the type to let her feelings easily surface, so you gotta be a lot more perceptive to get what she truly feels. I used to pride myself in being capable of that. I felt like I knew her better than I knew myself. That's why this is all so strange and frankly terrifying. We were sleeping in bed, and I was dreaming. I don't really remember what it was about, but for some reason, I'm sure of it, until I heard her voice, very close to my ear. Knock, 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 knock. She was caressing my hair, gently, while sitting in bed and looking below at me. I slowly opened my eyes, groggy from sleep. Hey, what is it, baby? She kept looking at me, fixated, and repeated, knock, 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 knock. I glanced at the digital clock on top of the dresser. 3:27 a.m. I had work in only a few hours. What is it, Ellen? She paused. Please answer the joke, dear. Knock, 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 knock. Fine. I accepted, mostly because I was expecting some kind of surprise. Ellen wasn't the type to do what she was doing for no reason. Who's there? Her smile opened up, and she answered, Not me. So don't answer the door. I kept looking at her, dumbfounded. What's that supposed to mean? Is that it? Is that the joke? Yes, she said, laying in the couch and covering herself with a blanket. Thank you for answering. Weirdo, I answered, closing my eyes and going back to sleep. Next morning, things went as usual. I only remembered the strange conversation while I was alone in the bathroom, brushing my teeth, and wasn't even sure if it had truly happened or if it was just a weird dream. So, we had our breakfast together, and she was acting normal, reading something aloud from a fashion magazine. Frankly, I wasn't paying much attention, so I took the opportunity to ask about last night. Initially, she didn't seem to know what I was talking about. Then her eyes fixated on me, and the same smile from last night crossed her face briefly, and I knew it wasn't just a dream. She told me it wasn't anything of importance, and stopped paying attention when I asked more inquisitively. And even though I shouldn't, I gave up. I had work and other matters to attend to, and just brushed off the weird event thinking it wouldn't happen again. But the following night, I woke up to her voice. Knock, knock. A pause. Knock. What is it now? I said. Ellen, what are you doing? Knock, knock, knock. She repeated. This time, she wasn't even touching me, just sitting in bed, looking at me with that same smile, but her eyes seemed larger, and she blinked in longer intervals. I looked at the clock. Once again, 3:27 a.m. Ellen, come on. What is it? I got work in a few hours. Can't have the luxury of waking up in the middle of the night to answer knock-knock jokes. Knock, knock, knock. This is getting creepy, you know? I'm not sure if this is some gag you've been doing, but I don't like it. Answer it. Knock, 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 knock. I sighed, but also let a small laugh escape. It was creepy, of course, but she was also my Ellen, so it didn't bother me as much as it should. Fine. Who the fuck is there? I answered in a playful tone. Not me, so don't answer the door. Well, for some reason, I felt a chill down in my spine. It was the same answer as before, and I still didn't get what it meant. But the way she said it, with a strange monotone voice, contrasted well with her smile, and the fact that I had no idea of what she meant by that. What does that mean? I asked. I really don't get it. She just smiled and went back to sleep. I felt a throb in my heart, but did the same. Next day, we talked again about what was happening. She was very evasive with my questions, and I barely got her to say anything. It was almost as if she couldn't talk about it, which was very strange, considering we talk about pretty much everything. I told her I needed to be well rested for work, something she should understand well, and wasn't liking her little gag every night. She just nodded, and I decided to not press further, as I didn't want to hurt her feelings, and had work to attend to. When I got back home, we had dinner, watched a movie, and went to bed. Knock, knock. I opened my eyes faster this time around. In fact, I barely got any sleep. I just knew she would do it again and kept thinking about it the whole time. Glanced at the clock. 3:27 a.m. Knock, knock. I thought about ignoring her, just pretending I was asleep, and she wouldn't wake me up. So I closed my eyes slowly, hoping that she hadn't seen me opening them in the first place, and stayed quiet. Knock, knock. She continued. She didn't stop. I regulated my breathing, but she kept going. Knock, knock. I'm not answering your fucking joke, Ellen. Stop it. Knock, knock. I ignored, but she kept going. She had never been this insistent with anything before. I tried to ignore it, but it was getting on my nerves. And frankly, I felt scared. Why was Ellen doing this? Why every night? At the same exact time, down to the minute? Why wouldn't she let me sleep until I answered her? Knock, knock. I got up in a sudden movement. God damn it, Ellen. I was ready for a discussion, but when I finally glanced at her, it was as if the strength was drained from me. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't blinking, just staring right at me, fixated like an animal. And her mouth was moving, slowly, and she didn't stop. Knock, knock. I didn't know how to react, or what expression I had when I saw her, but my heart skipped a beat. It was terrifying, as if her gaze froze me in place. 1,000-yard stare. Knock, knock. Who's there? I asked, feeling as if it was the only way out of that nightmare. Not me, so don't answer the door, she said, weakly. Ellen slowly closed her eyes and laid down. I kept staring at her while she fell into what seemed to be a deep sleep. I got up and left. I walked downstairs and sat down at the couch in the living room, staring at the night sky outside and absorbing the quiet of the neighborhood. My heart was beating fast, and it didn't slow down. I was too scared to sleep in the same room as my girlfriend, all because of a fucking knock-knock joke. But it was unnatural. I thought about calling someone. I thought about it all being some kind of sleep-related issue, such as some type of sleepwalking. But it didn't make any sense. I felt so tired, and decided that early in the morning, I would call an old friend who's a psychologist and get the opinion of a professional. Something was wrong with Ellen. I stayed in the couch as the day rose, and once Ellen woke up, she was acting normal again. Even asked me why I wasn't in bed. I didn't answer. In fact, I didn't speak to her and simply left for work. She seemed very upset, but I wouldn't do anything about it. Once I got to work, I called my friend, told him everything that was happening in as much detail as I'm describing now. He didn't seem as worried as I figured, but we agreed in making an appointment for next week. Now, I just needed to convince Ellen to come with me. I received plenty of text messages from her. She seemed very worried, sad, and even confused. She apologized a lot, and it broke my heart a little. I felt bad. I shouldn't have, but I answered her and made her promise it wouldn't happen again. I also told her about the appointment, and she seemed reluctant but agreed to go with me. So we made up. This was Ellen, after all. The girl I knew ever since I was 6 years old. The woman I loved, and that had taken care of me for years. And as much as that strange behavior creeped me out, she wasn't doing anything particularly frightening or even dangerous. So for a brief while, I convinced myself I should give her another chance. When I returned home from work, we stayed together. She even prepared my favorite meal. Ellen was acting as gentle and caring as I always remembered, and I slept with her in our bedroom, even though I was still a bit reluctant. Knock. I couldn't believe it. She promised me she wouldn't. Knock. I gazed at the clock. 3:27 a.m. Always. Knock. I was laying on my stomach, and I couldn't see her face. In fact, I didn't even bother to look at her. I was feeling more sad than scared at that point. Sad that she had broken her word. Knock. Who's there? I answered, determined to just go back to sleep. Not me, so don't answer the door. I stayed quiet and closed my eyes. I just hoped I would be able to handle it until the appointment next week. To my surprise, I was actually able to sleep. Probably because I hadn't been able to rest since last night. The following morning, I went back to not saying anything to Ellen, only very limited responses. I was expecting her to act same as yesterday, trying to apologize, but she didn't. Mostly she didn't say anything, almost as if she had accepted it. She also looked tired, or at least a bit weak. I went to work, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. Didn't receive any messages either. Once I got back, we had the most silent dinner I ever had in my life, and she barely ate anything. I decided to let her have the bedroom and sleep on the couch. I wasn't sure if it would stop her, but held on to the hope that she wouldn't go downstairs only to tell me the same knock joke again. I covered myself with a blanket, shaked off that uneasy feeling, and tried to sleep. I had had a deep sleep, without dreams. Felt like I was lost in darkness. Then I heard breathing, opened my eyes to see Ellen, standing above me, looking at me with big, fixated eyes and dilated pupils that didn't seem to belong in such a completely neutral expression. Watching me sleep, I almost screamed in terror, jumped out of the couch, and her eyes followed me as I stumbled through the dark room, creating distance between us. For a moment, I was able to glance at the clock above the table. 3:27 a.m. Ellen, what are you doing? I asked, desperate, but she didn't move. In fact, she didn't say anything, just stared at me as if I was made of glass and she could see right through me. Then I heard a knock on the front door. Instinctively, I looked in that direction. It was followed by another knock, and another. Someone almost pounding at the door. I glanced back at Ellen, and she was still staring at me. Slowly, I got closer to the door, and she didn't move. The pounding continued. "Who's there?" I screamed. It stopped, and then I heard a voice. "John? John, can you hear me? Open the door, please. John, please open the door." I froze in place. The voice kept calling me. But I couldn't believe it. It was Ellen's voice, coming from the other side of the door. But it couldn't be. "I beg you, John, open the door. It's serious. She's not me. I swear. She's not me." Slowly, I turned my head to look at Ellen, standing in front of the couch. She was looking at me, the same fixated eyes and a terrible, wide grin across her face. The pounding continued. "John, open the door. Please, you have to trust me." I stayed still, not knowing what to do. And I don't remember what happened after that. I just woke up in my bedroom. The digital clock indicates it's 4:21 a.m. Ellen isn't by my side. I'm completely alone. I'm trembling uncontrollably, and I don't know what's going on. I don't remember what happened after I saw her terrible grin. I don't know if I opened the door. I tried to look for my phone, see if I could call the police, or at least someone that I know, but I left it downstairs. All I have is Ellen's laptop, and it's where I'm writing this right now to get advice, because I can't go downstairs. The corridor is dark, very dark.